Hello everybody, we're just waiting a few more minutes for people to join and then we'll get started. You should be able to see the holding screen on PowerPoint. We're meeting everybody as they're joining today. Daniel, hopefully you're ready to go and I'll pass control to you in a few minutes. Okay, we're now past time and we've got quite a few people in, so let's get started. Good evening, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. Just to show you the outline of the agenda. Obviously, it's the first of the MK RPA Meetup sessions that we've had online. So obviously your feedback on this will be very welcome, but thanks very much for joining us all today. Daniel from UiPath is going to be presenting in just a few minutes. I'll let him introduce himself and take you through both the presentation. I know he's also got some case studies and demos to go through. So in total, it'll be about an hour and we'll hopefully have questions and answers at the end of that session. Just before we get kicked off though, I'd just like to highlight to you that this event is part of the MK Tech Fringe, Milton Keynes' Tech Week, which is very much about celebrating engaging technology being used in business. And we've got a whole mixture of events. Obviously, there's this one going on across the week, but during the week, we've got things on social media, automation, AI, video. Oh, and of course, I should have put up there cybersecurity. So please go and have a look at the website. You should be able to find MK Tech Fringe on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and we're Twitter and stuff. We're out there doing things to make it visible. There's a whole range of events. Most of them are free. There's a few low-cost training events which you can sign up to as well. But most of the free sessions have a lot of knowledge to be shared and gained and insight to look at. So hopefully some exciting topics out there. Please take advantage of them and get involved. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Daniel, who's going to be talking about UiPath and the Hyperautomation initiative. Thank you. Daniel, over to you.
Those machines to develop their own models for patterns and trends in numerical data, for instance. So you can feed a lot of numerical data into a machine and it can develop a mathematical description of that by means of an algorithm. So that if you are, for example, to feed another similar piece of data in, it's going to give you a response back that fits a trend or a pattern that it's determined. Machine learning is very important as well. We've got some examples we can discuss there. Long-running workflows, what the heck is that? Well, traditional RPA was really all about, if you like, replacing those human tasks entirely, but really the real power, as we'll see a bit later, is where you keep humans in the loop with any automation. And traditionally, whenever you had to hand over one of these robotic automations to a human, the process would effectively just pause and wait for you to finish. That's not a great use of a robot's time. So a long-running workflow is some task that's been handed over to us, the humans, to action, maybe through some form of a web interface for authorization or approval, for example. But we allow the robot to continue working away in the background, so it's not wasting any time. And when we finished our job, it picks up where it left off. Advanced analytics. Well, I'll come back to that point in a minute, because what I want to relate that to also here is process mining. There are some very, very clever algorithms written to really look at opportunities for automation just by watching us work or watching data flow through a system. And process mining is a method where we can apply these algorithms to search for those best opportunities for automation and almost recommend to us where we need to make improvements. So process mining is a really, really interesting science. And that's all part of this hyperautomation bucket as well. And by looking for those opportunities for automation, you can almost say, well, let's model that. Let's say if we automate some of these bottlenecks, these challenges, you could make some cost savings. And the advanced analytics bit in the red section there says, well, if you've made these promises up front, let's measure the automation and let's see if those promises are being met. So advanced analytics also incorporating some artificial intelligence in there as well. And native integrations, we'll come onto that point a bit later as well, because there's great power in not just what we do at UiPath, but in the services and capabilities being provided by the other best of breed providers out there, like Google and Microsoft and Amazon, etc., etc. So what is automation? Well, it's a lot of those things, but with very much RPA at the center. So we're ideally placed to incorporate all these additional capabilities and skills, but throw it into traditional RPA. So for instance, not just moving data around, as I explained, but to make sense of that data as well. That, in probably way too long an introduction, is what hyperautomation is all about. But I want to sort of relate it back to where we at UiPath sit. So history lesson, ye olde UiPath platform. This, certainly when I started, was very much our description of the services we provide. We have a studio that allows you to build some robot processes. And those of you who are familiar with our studio will know that probably inside and out. We've got our orchestrator, which allows you to manage those processes and deploy them out to robots to actually run. And therefore, we have the robots as well to actually run them. So that used to be it. We realized through this whole discussion of hyperautomation that any RPA journey is much bigger than building, managing, and running. It's also discovering. And that's what I was relating to a bit earlier. So process mining, task mining, task capture. These are names of products that we have in our discovery section. And I'll give you a quick demo of some of those a bit later. So any center of excellence or even any company who are looking at any automation adoption, they obviously need to think about what processes work best for automation rather than just jumping in and building them. And that's what our Discover part aims to help them with. Also, another part is the engagement. And this is what I mentioned a bit earlier, the human in the loop component. Let's not get rid of everybody. You end up with a series of automations where you potentially end up with robots making poor decisions. They always need us to assist in some respect. And that's the human in the loop, the engagement part. And finally, I mentioned also the measurement phase, looking at the promises that were made right back at the discovery phase and seeing whether we're meeting expectations, delivering ROI, etc., etc. So that's our complete platform. What I want to do is just to start to delve a little bit into some of these parts on our platform, showing a few demos where possible. But also, I know we've got a chat facility here. So I just want to keep that open as well, because if anybody does have any questions, certainly plop them into there if you need. But at certain points, I will open the floor for questions a little bit, but we'll try and save them, the vocal questions, for the end. Okay, back on here. So we're going to start off with this Discover part. We've got something called the Automation Hub. And what we realized that we needed is really a central tool that can really span across all these different components. But we're really focusing in its functionality at the moment in the discovery phase. So what is Automation Hub? Well, this slide shows some capabilities of that, things like pipeline identification, ROI calculator, documentation bank, component store, community, and a dashboard. I don't really want to just label them like that. And in fact, I'm even going to skip this slide. I want us to have a quick demo of what it looks like, and so we can talk through the different components. So a challenge of any center of excellence without something like Automation Hub is that they need to centrally manage their pipeline. And how do they do that? Well, they're equipped with some stakeholders, some project managers, some business analysts who are also in touch with the subject matter experts. And you think about the business analysts, it's usually their job to go out and fish around for opportunities for automation. And that might mean interviewing people. And in one of my previous roles in a previous company, I did just that. I ran a consultancy looking for process improvement opportunities. So I would go into organizations and interview them. And it's really hard, I'll be honest. It's difficult talking to the right people, getting them to reveal the right bits of information. So it's very common for a lot of opportunities to go unmissed, to go missed. And what the Automation Hub is all about is, yes, it's a pipeline tool. It replaces something like Excel. Some of you may be familiar with creating a pipeline in Excel. But it's also, if I just show top right, a location where a central web-based site that people can submit ideas. So let's do that. Let me imagine a scenario where I work in, for example, a finance team, and one of my roles is to, let me just open up this other application here. One of my roles is to input expense data. So I come in perhaps on a Monday morning and a system or people have put in this data into this Excel file for me. And my job, as much as I love it, is to copy and paste this data from the Excel sheet. Hit look up, paste it in here. You get the idea. I'm certainly not going to do the whole sheet, right? That'd be a complete waste of time. So that's very long-winded. It's slow. It's very repetitive. It's prone to error because I could be copying and pasting the wrong cells. God forbid I'm actually typing anything in. But I might hit submit on this, and that goes off to some backend system. So how can we use Automation Hub for me, the business user, the subject matter expert, to submit this as an idea for automation? Well, first step would be a Center of Excellence need to expose the Automation Hub to me. And you can have effectively unlimited business user access to Automation Hub. So let's do that. I would gain access to this, and I click on this submit idea. I could click on the left-hand side and learn a bit more about process automation, but I'm not going to do that right now. And I'm going to get started. So a short description of the task I have in mind is expense input from Excel. Keep it simple. If I had a bit more time, I might write a bit more description there, but I'm going to hit next. And the name of this process from now on is going to be just expense input. Now, one thing that really helps the Center of Excellence team out is if I can categorize this process into certain areas. So automation area, got a whole bunch of them in here, very customizable list, but I'm going to choose finance, and it's none of these, it's expenses. There we go. And subcategory of employee expenses. Great, I've categorized it. Click next. Now, those of you who have done this sort of process identification and measurement before, you'll be familiar with some of these questions, but these are really critical because they, at a very simple level, really estimate the suitability for automation. So how rules-based is my task? Do you know what? It's really rules-based. I just copy and paste from Excel. So not a lot of gray matter decision skills going in here. So I'm just going to say very rules-based. Next. How would you describe the input data for the task or process? Well, if it was all coming in via paper, God forbid those days are gone. So I would put it down to paper, but in this case, it's Excel. Hold on, apart from Jim, the CEO, who always likes to submit his expenses as scraps of paper. So I'm going to say pretty much digital, apart from Jim. And I might write a small few expletives down here about Jim and hit next. And how would I describe the structure of the input data? Well, all of it that's coming in via Excel is great, nicely structured. Those coming in from Jim, not quite so good. So I can't give it full marks here. There's a little description down the left-hand side always in these questions. Next. Are you aware of any expected changes? Well, the reason it's asking this is there's no point automating a process if it's due to be changed very, very soon, certainly not within the next 6 months. So I'm going to say no change expected. And in fact, perhaps this is the way I've always input this data. Do you have any documentation? Well, I could put an example here of the Excel file, but I'm going to be lazy and say there's no documentation. And please indicate the process owner. I have no idea who that is, so I'm going to hit next. And here's a summary now of all of those different responses I gave. So if I hit submit, saving my changes, and immediately it's giving me, the SME, the business user, an automation score, currently 76%. It's also saying it's 87% suitable for automation based on the information it has, and 60% ready for automation. It's a bit lower because I didn't submit any documentation or anything. And it's now suggesting really that I can view the progress, I can have notifications, but also I could submit some process information, a document with task capture. I'll come on to that in a second. But there's my idea. This has a score, and this is now being submitted effectively to the Center of Excellence. And it's their role to look not only at this idea, but all the ideas. So here I've got lots of different ideas that have been submitted by different people, all with their own idea scores and potentials. And based on all of this information, they can start to weigh these processes against each other and say, well, listen, which ones are best for automation? What are the low-hanging fruits that we can tackle here? And in fact, if I go to this decision pipeline, I can view all those ideas as a matrix. So here we've got all the low-hanging fruits top right, and the more challenging ones bottom left. So very quickly, I can tackle a number of these. I'm going to whiz back to the presentation now. So the next step is the Center of Excellence may say, well, that's great. We've now identified some ideas, or we've got some ideas that have been submitted, and we've determined that maybe we want to go ahead with some of them. So what the next step is to start to investigate, delve a bit deeper into these actual ideas. And we do that by the least amount of effort possible. Being a business analyst in the past, it's quite a lengthy process finding out more information. And what we do have is some tools to help. So we've got something called task capture and task mining. Task mining is coming out a bit later in the year, but I can demo to you now very quickly the task capture phase. So let's say that the business analyst now is sat down with the SME, and they've downloaded from the Automation Hub this tool called Task Capture. It's just loading up. It's a very lightweight app, and it's very simple to use. So what we should see, here we go, is it's only going to give me two options once it's finished opening up here. The two options are, do you want to map out the process using a process diagram, or do you want to just record it? Do you know what? We're going to do the easy one, and we're just going to record it. So I'm just going to say, capture the process. And what we should see is a little recorder tool that's appeared on my screen. And I can just step through, as the business user, the steps again, oops, that I filled in before. I can try and make some spelling mistakes because I'm rubbish at typing right now. And that's it, I can hit submit, done. I'm going to stop the recording. And what we're given is, very quickly, a very simple process diagram. From start, we did some stuff, and that's it. I can also very quickly say, well, do you know what? I've got some other decisions that I normally make here. Maybe the expense value is above a certain threshold applying to a business rule. And maybe I need to communicate with a line manager to check that this expense is being approved or not. So I could map out this process a bit better. But what's important here is that if I click on this first step, you can see all the screenshots appearing on the right-hand side here. And I can step through these. I can do crazy things like blur out sensitive information. I can stick lovely great arrows all over the place. Basically, this forms the documentation for my PDD, the process document. Export and publish. And I can publish directly to a Word template, which is doing in real time right now, and very quickly open the file. So you'll appreciate I'm going quite fast through things, but what I want to really give you is just a bit of a flavor of some of the possibilities of what's achievable now with hyperautomation. So this PDD that we have here is a template, but what's important here is that parts of this template have been filled in. So process execution time, 24 seconds. We've got the diagram there. We've got number of mouse clicks and number of keys pressed, all that sort of vital information, and each of the screenshots with a measurement of the time for each of those individual steps. And this is gold dust for any sort of business analyst. And they could then save this, they could add to it, but crucially publish it back to the automation hub. Really empowering the Center of Excellence then to have more evidence. And very quickly, just to show you what you end up with then, the more metrics you put into this, the more information you can garner about the suitability. So for instance, lots of metrics in this particular process around volumes. Here we go. So how many volumes, how long it takes for each iteration of this. And what that gives you then is things like costs. So this process, whatever it is, invoice processing here, currently costs $211,000 a year to actually handle. And with a degree, a percentage of automation for some of those tasks, we can make $122,000 of cost savings in year one, and potentially a different amount in year two. So really, really interesting information that can be input here. And that's really, really important to, as part of this discovery phase, to get as much information out to better equip you then for the development phases later on. You can even have a project plan here that helps you plan out that delivery. Okay, we're just at half an hour stage. So I'm just going to, that's the demo. We also have some process mining capability as well, which looks not at my interactions with applications, but you hook it up to the actual systems that handle the data. So for instance, think about invoice processing. There's evidently going to be an invoice number that's going to be keyed in at some stage. And that's going to flow through different systems like SAP or through Salesforce, etc. Maybe through other backend systems or custom systems or databases. And by monitoring the flow of that data and timestamping all of that, you can apply algorithms to automatically map out the process, not just the happy path, but the frequency of all those exception paths as well. And that in itself starts to offer opportunities for improvement, some of which could be automated, some of which could be solved just by improving the process. So the process mining is a very, very powerful tool that can be implemented before automation and also after automation to see that you're making those improvements as you expect. Okay. So AI skills. This is one of the key parts of the hyperautomation discussion. And I've highlighted how AI skills can affect the build, manage, and run phases here. So we see that our robots have built into them a whole bunch of embedded skills, and these are increasing as always over time. So we at UiPath are investing a large amount of money in these embedded skills, things like conversational understanding. So in other words, things like sentiment evaluation, understanding through natural language processing. And this opens the door to chatbot integration, etc. Document understanding. So we have some machine learning models that out of the box can read invoices and receipts. So we've trained up these models ready to process those types. So no longer do you have to do the hard work of creating fixed templates for invoices. We can naturally understand those just by the way they look, in the same way that we do. If I gave any of you an invoice to look at, you could understand that. Process understanding, we've just touched on about the process mining aspect. So understanding flow of data and our interactions with it, and offering suggestions for improvement. And finally, visual understanding. So over many traditional RPA years, robots interacting with applications, you'd have to define quite strict rules about where they click and where they type. But when I give any human the same instructions to interact with an application, I talk about it on a very different level. I tell them to look for labels or click on buttons with labels on them. And our visual understanding capabilities with machine learning, we've trained up some ML models to better understand user interfaces. So they understand directly what a button is, what a text box is, and what labels are. And you can reference those controls more easily by the text that's around them. And that's a much more human way of interacting with applications. We've got ecosystem skills, and I can't remember if I've got the slide. Yes, I do. So ecosystem skills are skills not provided directly by UiPath, but the other best of breed providers. So big players like Microsoft, Google, IBM, etc., invest huge amounts in their own cognitive and AI skills. And we promote the use of those services by taking the hard work of doing API integration and just offering them as drag and drop services directly into a process. So those logos you see on the screens are not customers, they're technical partners that we integrate their services with. Probably recognize a few big players in there, for instance, in the field of document understanding, players like Abby, and of course Microsoft and Google as well. Just going to go back up a slide. And custom skills. Developing machine learning models is all very well for very popular things like user interfaces or invoices and receipts. But more often than not, if you work for a company that's big enough to have a group of data scientists, they will evidently be creating machine learning models for certain situations that are applicable to your business. And one challenge that we always encounter with companies that do have data scientists is that they tend to work in their own little team. RPA developers work in their own separate team, and the two never really meet. So the data scientists have an issue that they don't have anywhere to deploy their machine learning models, and the RPA engineers equally don't have an easy way to deploy them into their processes. So there's these two types of AI user and creator, the RPA developer and the data science team.
I'll show you a real good example of that.
So is that someone?
It's all right. Somebody joined. I can get quickly enough to it to mute them. They are muted now.
No problem. So, you know, and if the question coming on the audio just then was, do we have an example of that? Well, an example might be, for instance, a telecommunications company. One challenge that they tend to have is they need to retain their customers as much as they can, and being able to detect likelihood of churn, so how likely their customers are to detract and move on to a different provider, is one challenge that they have. But it's very easy to create a machine learning model based on all this customer data that you have and their resultant churn. And one example of AI being deployed like this through our AI Fabric tool is that once those models are created, they can be deployed as skills into the actual studio process as a drag and drop exercise. So AI Fabric really brings those teams together, gives them a central platform to use both for deployment and version control of the machine learning models, but also then deployment into the processes using the studio tool. Now, that's probably a whole discussion all by itself, but that's really how you can develop your own custom AI skills and deploy them within your own processes. So the other key part we mentioned up front is this human in the loop factor. So we do always need to factor in humans in any really good and effective process. This harks back to the BPM days. It used to be a case of mapping out all of the human tasks. And it's very easy in traditional RPA just to map out the robot tasks and say, off you go and do that. And whenever a human was necessary in that process, you'd split it into two separate processes, before human and after human. But now with our engage capabilities, you really design those human steps, those human tasks within your process. And I've got a couple of demos around that in a second. And that really just lends itself to this whole conversation of, what is automation? Well, on the left-hand side, we've got no robots being used. So this is humans working together as a team, and all work is manual. That evidently has its constraints and difficulties around accuracy and speed, etc., etc. But the other scenario that we're not really recommending is fully unattended, which is over on the right-hand side, which is you've got back office robots just churning through data and moving it around. There are, of course, some use cases that fit into that model, but we're finding the best value of RPA and automation, certainly in the hyperautomation discussion, is where you mix the different types of robot together, the unattended back office robot and the front office attended robot with the humans. So there can be handoff to these different personas at different stages. So just think, for example, invoice processing. You might have some back office robots scanning through emails and pulling out attachments of invoices. It might be processing those. Now let's suppose that actually some bits of data on these invoices is either bad quality or scan quality isn't very good, and the robots are struggling. Great, let's pass it off to a human to check the data. Perfect. Pass it back into the loop, the robot continues. Maybe we also need a level of approval on some of these invoices. So great, pass it off back to a human again, and they can approve it or reject it. And these are all different scenarios that exist in all of our offices and workplaces. I've got a couple of examples in a second. I'm going to skip this slide, just time permitting. So we have mentioned probably more than twice now this human in the loop concept and long running workflows, but there are also a couple of other types of human in the loop interactions as well. One is, well, the attended robot. Those of you who are familiar with that, that's a robot that sits on my desktop. It's not a back office robot. We actually have a little robot tray, which I can bring up here. So this is a robot tray, and I can interact with my robot on my desktop using this tray, and I'll do a demo of that in a second. So that might be me wanting to do that expenses input, and I can just fire off now by hitting play that expenses input. Another interaction type is getting the robot or the attended robot to assist in my daily activities by looking out for what I'm doing. So I may be interacting with an application that's badly designed, and there's some automations that can help there. So it can see that I'm perhaps struggling and offer to kick off a process based on that. I've got a quick demo of that as well in a second. So let's just jump to these. So the first one is, let's have a look at a call center scenario. So let's imagine that I'm now not working in finance, but I'm working in a call center. And if I just hit play on this, so what we should see in a second is an interface pop up. Now, because I'm in a call center, I'm evidently now talking to a customer, and the customer is telling me that they are Andrew Jones, and I'm asking them for their policy number, which I'm typing in. Now, this interface has been designed within our studio application. It's just through drag and drop tools. Just minimize that window there. And so you can design a very simple layer like this, and you can define what the actions are if I click on any of these buttons. If I click on this button here, I've instructed the robot to go off and look in Excel for that policy number and return me with the details, which I'm populating here. Here we've got the details. I can say to Andrew Jones, is your name Jones? And can you confirm your date of birth? They may do that. Yes, details correct. And then I can continue with the rest of the conversation. We've got their address details now. Well, maybe Andrew Jones is telling me that actually the date of birth within our system is wrong and he'd like that updated. So I can update this here and click on the update details button. And notice I'm still having a conversation with the customer, but I don't need to switch within the applications myself. The robot's doing all the updates itself, which is just done. And I think there's another application that goes off to update as well. This is a web-based portal. So it's logging in and doing an update to that as well. So this is great customer experience because the customer has my full attention. I can continue having a conversation with him and not telling him to hold the line and juggle with applications. It's also quite useful to think of real use cases around coronavirus, for instance. I know there's a lot of people talking about use cases for coronavirus, but just thinking about in the insurance sector, are you currently in medical distress? Somebody might be calling me up and I can say, well, no. Are you calling about life insurance? Yes. They've realized they've not got a policy, and they want to open a policy. And I can get a robot to go off and do that now, which it's doing on my other screen. That's rather unhelpful. And it's just filling in details there. So all of this is really empowering me in the contact center with the aid of an attended robot to do all the functions that I do normally, but without me having to do them. I can just focus on the customer and you see a great increase in customer experience. Okay, I'll just let that finish. Now, another example I've got, let me just bring that up. Stop the process. Is going back to this web-based portal here. Now, I'll tell you a secret. I designed this website for demo purposes, and it's rubbish. Okay, so if I go to the account section here, let's pretend that I need to look up Andrew Jones's details again. I don't know his account number. And this web interface that I've created is rubbish. Think of it as a custom application you might be using internally. They're not always the best pieces of software. So what I've actually got is a robot that can assist me here. And this is using something called callouts. So let me just run this process. So that's now running, and the robot is watching effectively what I'm doing. And I've told it to look out for opportunities to help me. If I go to the accounts page and I click in this box here, what I should see, all being well, is that the robot pops up this little form here. And I can actually now type in Andrew Jones to the robot, hit lookup, robot goes off and does a lookup for me, pulls back the account number, types it in and hits search. So what we're doing is we're extending the capabilities of applications by allowing our attended robots to assist. And there's probably a whole bunch of use cases you can think of there. Think of day-to-day operations that you do. You may come in on a Monday morning and someone's asked you to generate a report. Well, if you're doing that report again and again, week after week, then why not create an automation for it so that when you go to the website for that, the robot suggests, let me go and do that report for you and let it do it in the background. So that's a really interesting use case there. I'll just stop this robot. So human in the loop, really, really important stuff, and really key to the hyperautomation stuff. So where do we get to? The last point I wanted to cover, and I think I'm just about on time, is insights. Now, insights is really on our little display here. It's the last part of our RPA journey. And it's now assuming that you have, for instance, a center of excellence up and running. You've got some automations running. You don't even need to have a center of excellence. But measurement phase is all about looking at the performance of the robots and the processes. And yes, it's useful to know when they have exceptions and be able to drill down and find out why they're having exceptions or problems, or why systems are not behaving quite as well as they should be. But another very important part of our insights application is also key performance indicators, things like ROI. Well, you've got to remember that our own system has visibility of how many robots are being used and for how long, and how long processes take. Well, we know, or you can input the value of each of those robots and their time, therefore. And you can come back with metrics of, if you put them in, of how long it typically takes a human to work through the process, and therefore how long less it takes for a robot to work through the process, and feed that into an ROI metric. So you could set a target and say, we want to hit ROI in 6 months, return on investment. And the system has all the metrics it needs. So it can tell you, or indeed warn you, if you're not going to meet that ROI. But crucially, if you're not going to meet it, why not? Which processes are not performing as well as they should be? Is that because they were badly designed, or is it because the systems that they're interacting with are not as performing as you'd hope? So lots of interesting dashboards there that can provide greater metrics, not just to the developers and the center of excellence, but also to the stakeholders as well, at the C-suite level, who need to effectively sign off the next set of work. So lots of interesting dashboards there. And it's all built into effectively our own user interfaces. Okay. That's, I think, all I wanted to say on that. And the last thing I just really wanted to say before we come on to the Q&A is really an example of a demo that brings a lot of these different things together. And the last example or demo I have is, I open my box here, let's go to here. Let me just bring this up on the screen. I should have gone to this box first. There we go. And so let's imagine I work for some central service team, and a lot of emails come in, and some of them are from customers rating our service. This isn't my service, by the way. These are emails you'll know are all from me, so they're example emails. Some of them are very positive and some of them are quite negative. We also have an invoice come in. So this is from a supplier saying, please pay this. Please pay this because it's way overdue. And we've also got an application form as well, which I can open up. And the application form is all handwritten stuff. Now, trying to process all of these things in one go without the concept of AI and cognitive skills is quite tricky. And what I'm going to get a robot to do is, if I just mark them all as unread, is to look at these emails in this particular UI bank box, sort them, and sort them into application forms, invoices, and priority boxes. How is it going to determine the priority of some of these emails? Well, I can apply a simple rule that says, look at the content and try to determine the sentiment of each of those emails. So somebody being quite critical will have a negative sentiment, and that's something perhaps I want to put as a high priority item for some service team to support. So there they are. Let me bring up my robot tray again. and I'm just going to hit this process. So if I go play, this is all done in real time just to really keep everybody on edge. So the robot's now playing, and you should see these emails starting to not delete, but they're actually being siphoned off to some of these boxes down here. It's gone through all of those. I'll come onto this message box in a minute. And you'll notice if I go to the high priority box, these are the negative emails: terrible service, so expensive, really poor help desk. We've got low priority over here, which is the positive email. So not something I actually need to action here. It's nice to have them, but there's probably bigger fish to fry right now. We've got the application form, and we've got the invoice as well. So what it's come up with here is a message to say, we found an invoice, hurrah. I'll pass it to another robot so you can continue the demo. Great. So if I just hit OK, that invoice has now gone off effectively to the back office, and we should be able to continue the rest of the demo now. The next thing that happens is that this attended robot here should pop up on the screen. We found an application form. Would you like to see it processed at fast speed? Well, I want to be able to talk through this. So I'm going to say, let's do it at slow speed. And for our benefit, it's just going to bring up the image of this particular application form. Lots of handwritten text on there, and we're using Abby in this case to extract the content, even though it's handwritten. And what it should do is, here we go, offer me a view of what it's recognized for the date of birth, 10/09/1975. Well, that looks right for me, so I can confirm. So this is effectively a human in the loop stage, but it's quite a simplistic view, and I can just confirm that. And what we should see now is the robot then opening up Excel and doing a lookup. This is all traditional RPA stuff here on in, and I'll just let it whiz through this. But also in the background, I can't show you that because it's on a different robot, but we've got the invoice being processed. So it will be thrown to a machine learning model that understands invoices. And it doesn't really care for the actual layout of that document as long as it looks and resembles an invoice. While this all continues, it's updating a mainframe system. Rather too slow because I've put too many pauses in here. What I wanted you to take away from this bit is that you can have a bunch of these robots doing different things at the same time, all from one process. So you might farm off some of these mainframe updates to a separate robot, etc. And hopefully that should be it. And this now plays itself to the human in the loop aspect again, because that invoice that I got a back office robot to process, if I just log into the orchestrator that I'm using for this demo, let's choose me. If you've not seen the orchestrator before, orchestrator is where you do all of the management of the robots, the processes, things like queues, so you can manage auto firing off of processes. But one item that I want to show you just here is something called actions. This is an action center. If I click in there, you'll see that just a few seconds ago here, it received an invoice. And this is the invoice that that back office robot had processed. And what I've told it to do is to, yes, extract all the data from it, but pass it up to a human user to check. So I'm just going to assign it to myself and open this up. And remember, this is all still now within the web interface. So I don't need to be to have an attended robot on my desktop to view this sort of information. I can see that it's read the name, the address, and it's understood the address as well. Equally the billing address and invoice number, etc. We've even got the line items within the table as well. Professional services. For some reason it didn't pick up the one. I can manually do that. Save and close and save. So a lot of things to talk about. There was email triage by looking for keywords, first of all, to separate into invoices, application forms. Anything else was being pushed to cognitive analysis. And I'm using services provided by Microsoft for that. There's also actually a precursor stage to check that those emails were in English. And so I'm using Google services for that. So I'm pulling upon their resources, using their AI and cognitive capabilities, and sorting the emails into different priorities based on the sentiment. We've also got the text extraction, even though it's handwritten from the application form, handing off then to traditional RPA to input the data. We've got invoice understanding from our document understanding capabilities using machine learning. And we've got human in the loop capability in our action center here on the screen. So a lot of information to discuss. Hopefully the demo put it all together. And yeah, I think we've reached the end certainly of my piece, but I'd love to hear any feedback or open the floor to questions.
Thanks, Daniel. Really helpful. Obviously, in terms of doing questions, probably the easiest way, because some people might be in noisy environments. If you can just put your name or question in the chat, and I can unmute you. I appreciate it always takes a bit of time. Waiting for the chat to refresh, see if there's anybody there. No questions coming to the chat. Can I see anybody who's typing? I'll put the hand up and wave at me if you're on video. A lot of people have got static pictures. There's Russell. He wants to chat by the looks of it. Yes, Russell? No? You've got a couple of questions coming up in chat. Daniel, I don't know if you've seen those.
Yeah, certainly. So that's from Shivanshu. So from a bot development perspective, how well does UiPath handle unstructured data? Non-standardized inputs and captures, yeah, okay. So let's tackle that one first. So unstructured data is, yes, it's always a challenge. And thinking about things like document understanding, we always categorize documents into three types. We've got the unstructured documents, which are things like letters or legal contracts. And we've got the very structured documents like the application form you saw in the demo. In the middle, you've got invoices, which are semi-structured. They have some structure to them, but the layout will flow around and change. Yeah, they are challenging. And keeping with the document understanding side of things, you know, I've done a use case recently where I had to look through a whole bunch of legal contracts, looking out for book ISBN numbers and to extract those, and also author names. And it's quite interesting, and lots of different approaches to that. But you can use funny things like regular expressions to extract data. If you're familiar with that, a regular expression is defining a rule which may look for a certain type of data, a certain structure, like an ISBN number, I think has 9 digits or 14 digits, depending on the type. And, or it might be prefixed with the word ISBN. So you can define these sort of rules which determine how data is being extracted. They are more challenging, absolutely. And the other one, non-standardized inputs and captures. So captures, sure, they are there to thwart the capability of robots being deployed. And in those sort of scenarios, it's usually to restrict or control the bandwidth of use across a web application. So if anybody had an army of robots and they targeted them all at a website or application, if they didn't have a capture in there, which is designed to prevent robot use, then you've got bandwidth problems. You usually get around that not by trying to teach the robots how to do it, but to talk to the provider of that website or application and say, look, we've got a use case here where we need a robot to access information, and they can usually if they agree, give you another way in that bypasses that capture.
Thanks, Daniel. I guess I don't know if you've seen the next one down from John Stinson. To do with prioritization.
Oh, yes,
by
indeed.
score or pounds saved.
Yes, so there are lots of different ways of viewing this. So if I go back to my pipeline, I presume you're asking about the pipeline stuff. So yes, you can order these by idea score. You can order them by estimated benefit in terms of hours. And you can even, yes, order them by the cost savings as well. But one thing that we see is that, yes, that's useful just to view it in a table form like this. But some companies have their own ways of, I guess, prioritizing or avoiding automations. And you can customize or add additional questions into that qualification stage to say, for instance, does it use these types of applications, for example, which you happen to know are more challenging to automate. So you can really determine what the criteria are yourself and order them by that criteria.
I don't know if the next one you could pick up, Daniel. There was a question there about during the demo you were looking at unstructured data, being able to read handwriting. I think you were saying that was using the ABI integration.
Yeah, so handwriting's great. It's actually where I spent way too many years, 15 years or so of my career working through. So data capture solutions through handwriting recognition. And there are a few providers out there that provide handwriting recognition. So ABI, yes, is one of them. Microsoft have got some fantastic capabilities there as well. And there are two types of way of extracting that, either from a form based, where you've got nice set locations for data extraction, or I've seen people try to extract large paragraphs of handwritten text. Those are challenging. Technology is getting better as well. And we've got some interesting offerings coming into the fray as well within UiPath. But yes, you're able in effect to choose which provider that's going to do that data extraction during during the design phase, or even at a later stage. You can switch the provider in and out of your process as you see fit. Does it
Next
have
one
any
down,
AI
I guess, is
capabilities?
Russell. He's asked about how much of the tech you've used today is UiPath off the shelf and how much of it is bespoke.
Yeah, so in these demos here, I think I pointed to a few of them. So I've used a lot of other service providers for some of these. So the natural language processing capabilities was from Microsoft. The language detection was from Google. We got ABI, OCR, text extraction. And I think I also had a Microsoft text extraction also. So what I was doing is just very easy pulling those in, because with our ecosystem, we've got those connectors through to those services. I didn't need to do any coding. I could just choose while I was putting the process together, well, I'm going to use Google, Microsoft, ABI, whatever. So it's very, very easy. I didn't have to do any API coding.
Ian was asking, the sentiment analysis bot that you spoke about for looking at emails, is that using just UiPath or is that using some other machine learning facility?
That, in that case, was Microsoft. So Microsoft Cognitive Services. So they've got some fantastic natural language processing stuff in there. But there are others as well, like Stanford. The Microsoft one is a paid subscription. There are some others that aren't, but they all have their strengths and weaknesses, and it's a case of measuring them up against one another for your particular application.
Yeah, I guess it's part of UiPath being an open framework for some of that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Georgina was saying she runs a girls coding group in Bletchley Park and was asking about whether you've got a sandbox for hands-on of designing with UiPath for testing and learning.
Yeah, so it's something we're getting more and more involved with. In fact, I've got some colleagues who could probably talk about that in better detail than me. But yeah, we've done exactly that sort of thing for various age groups. And in fact, even just recently with a lockdown that we've we've been running some courses for children of UiPath employees to be able to jump in and learn about automations and ability to create robots. So yes, we do have some materials. We've got some quite exciting things coming up ahead of time. But yes, reach out to us and yeah, we can talk about that.
Of course, there's also the community edition that should be mentioned, Daniel, because anybody can download that and play with it for free.
Absolutely, good point, David.
As
yes,
an
indeed.
Just research. You know,
yeah,
not,
so the
not everything is a license sale, you see.
No, indeed, absolutely right. The community edition is great. It's effectively a fully fledged version of our studio and orchestrator for use, for playing around, for learning,
Exactly.
and for those non-production situations.
Next one down is Neeraj, who was saying, which industry verticals are more ripe for proliferation of hyperautomation in the wake of COVID-19?
Yeah, so it is something that we're getting very involved with now. And so lots of use cases that have come about with interaction and discussions with hospitals, particularly those hospitals that are doing amazing work in COVID-19 research, but also the pharmaceutical organizations as well, who have very suddenly got very high demand on finding ways through this towards a vaccine, which means they need to speed up their testing, and hyperautomation can very much assist with that. So yes, getting very involved with them, and also areas like any organization with a contact center. So insurance companies in particular, like the example I gave, their call centers are being inundated with large volumes of people asking about their policy, for instance, and whether that's affected by COVID-19. And think about the holiday sector, the leisure sector, who have got to suddenly deal with huge volumes of calls from people cancelling their holidays or wanting refunds, etc. So contact centers is a very big area for us right now.
Next one on the list, and if I'm picking out his name correctly, is Isaac. He was saying, for particular use of checking if the website is up and to perform a user simulation journey like a synthetic transaction, how much of that is possible through UiPath? And does it support the understanding of new changes implemented in a website? So I guess that's where you get new fields on a page and things.
Yeah, really good question. So there's some really handy tools within our studio that allow, for instance, you to record the steps involved in your navigation around a website, for instance, and to then replay that again if you need. It's useful for testing. We've got some other test tools coming out, but that's probably beyond the context of this conversation. But how a robot interacts with any application, whether it's a browser or any desktop application, there are lots of different ways of telling it where to click. The very last resort is position based. Way before that is a very cognitive ability of saying, in the same way that our eyes work, in that if I tell you to fill in a first name, last name fields on a web application, well, your eyes naturally scan around looking for the word first name and last name, right? And you know where the field is in relation to that. But we've got our computer vision capabilities that can use exactly that logic, look for anchors and type into or click relative to that anchor. So that's a very flexible format, because it means it's not layout dependent. Those things can all move around. And I think in particular your question, does it support new changes implemented in the website? Well, yes, it does. If it's just you're looking at things moving around, it can generally cope with that. If you set it up right, because you can override that and tell it to work on a different level, like position based. But so yes, it does handle that very well. We've got a great website to play around with called RPA Challenge, and it's just a test site that every time the screen refreshes, all the fields move around, and there's a challenge to get a robot to populate that those fields because they're always moving around, and it's an interesting way to test whether the automations are reliable and resilient to change.
It's probably worth just mentioning, Daniel, because it's out there in the community edition, that there is some functionality already available and some more obviously on the way from UiPath, specifically addressing test automation.
Absolutely,
I mean, obviously it's not
yeah.
in the main product yet, but it is in the community edition and available for preview, therefore.
Yeah, thanks, David. I was pertaining to that a little bit, but yes, on our very immediate roadmap, we've got a lot of test automation capabilities coming out, because, and Isaac, I'm not quite sure whether you're hinting at use in that area, but whenever a company is developing a new application, they naturally need to check that it works under a whole number of different scenarios. And what's nice is that rather than employing teams of people to churn through all of these different scenarios and check that the application behaves correctly, it's ideally suited for robots. So you define effectively a use case, and you say, well, interact with this application in this way. And then you can change that use case very, very easily. Say, well, instead of typing that number in, type this number in, see if it breaks it, or click on this button instead of that button and see if it breaks it, all that sort of stuff. And our test automation tools are really an extension of the studio to allow you to build all these use cases in, but also a framework to allow reporting back of which tests failed and which ones succeeded. And our studio and the way our robots work is that when they fail, they can capture screenshots, also videos, and also the full exception detail or business failure reason as to why they failed. And that's invaluable insights to any developer.
Georgina's just asked, if you have 2 or more robots that are involved with the same data, is there some automated tests to check against clashes? Hopefully I've represented that correctly, Georgina.
Yes, that's a good question. So let's think of my email example. So I designed a process to instruct my robot to go and look in that inbox and pull out any unread emails. Now, one thing I also got the robot to do is, once it's looked at it, is to mark that email as read, so that if I run the process again, it's not going to pick up the same ones. So when you're designing a process, you always need to think about, how am I going to mark something as done, or how am I going to lock something down to stop someone else coming in? If you think about something like Excel, you'll know that if 2 people try and open Excel at the same time, it issues a warning, right? That they can't both manipulate it if it's a non-cloud based version of Excel. And one way to approach that is, if you've got robots looking at files, then you get a robot to pull a file out and stick it somewhere else for its own processing, so that nobody else can grab that at the same time. But we also have intrinsic to our orchestrator something called queues. And queues effectively used just for lists of tasks to do. So you might push something onto a queue, and that will sit there waiting for a robot to pick it up and process it. But built into this is that it will prevent any clashes. So no 2 robots can pick up the same piece of queue data. So that sort of functionality is built in. Outside of that, as I say, you need to think about how can we avoid clashes if they are potentially looking at the same data.
The other point I've just might be of interest is, when you're designing the robots, it's quite important to be able to design, restart and reuse for resilience purposes, because you never know when something in the network or hardware will fail. So trying to design for recovery is quite an important aspect for some of that activity. Slightly difficult question, I think, Daniel. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this one, at least formally, as a UiPath employee. It's saying, to what date will the free UiPath certification be available?
Yeah, because it's great, right? I used it. I used it before I joined UiPath, and I became skilled up and certified, and it's great. And first of all, what I've got to say about the academy, just from experience, not because I work at UiPath, but the courses that are on the academy are really great, and they're free to dive into, to learn about all sorts of different aspects, technical aspects, non-technical aspects of RPA and UiPath product. Do have a look at them, absolutely. But this question is relating to the certification. It has always been free, and we keep saying that that certification is going to start being a paid service at some point. And then we keep extending it. I don't have the official line on whether or what that date is, but yeah, we are looking to cut off the free certification point at some point.
You just need a robot to keep extending it, and it won't be a problem.
I'll work on it.
Anyway, on to the next question. It's how and where are bot transactions logged using UiPath, and can the transactions be logged to Splunk or any other third party for analysis?
Really, really good question. So as part of any sort of governance and compliance and all that sort of stuff, it's really, really important to know what your robots are doing. And built in to all the functionality and the running of robots is that they all generate audit trails of the work that they do. And this could be very granular. It can be right down to the level of I clicked this button, or I typed this in, or it could be I ran through this process and I had these problems. And all of those audit trails are, customizable by you in terms of what sort of level you want to go to. But they all get stored on our central orchestrator application. So think of an army of robots all working away, all working through processes. They are all being fed orders from our central orchestrator. But equally, all of their actions and their performance and their audit trails are pushed back centrally to the orchestrator as well. And they're held in a NoSQL database, which is basically just a very large bucket to contain text information on these audit trails. And once in there, yes, you can apply dashboarding and reporting tools to that data to display dashboards. And I've shown one dashboard on our Insights product. So our Insights product can provide all that information for you, not just graphs of performance, but also actual run through and display of the audit trails. But we also have you also have capability to link in other types of dashboards like Tableau and Kibana, indeed Splunk. So that can be developed, but yeah, it's all there, all held centrally, and you do have access to it. Absolutely.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Not seen anything else come through. So I don't think if there aren't any more, obviously, thank you very much, Daniel, for that. It's really helpful.
No problem.
I appreciate your time and taking us through some examples as well as some PowerPoint, which is always good. Obviously, this is the first time we've run the RPA Meetup event online. If the situation continues, we'll probably be doing the next one online as well. So we'll obviously organise that. Any feedback on today in terms of any issues or difficulty, please drop me an email, send me a LinkedIn message or something. Happy to try and get that feedback so we can try and improve it. And any ideas for what you want covered in future events, please let us know. Finally, I guess it's worth just mentioning again, MK Tech Fringe has got a whole lot of other events on that I think many of you will find interesting, covering AI, some other RPA type activities. So have a look at that and scan around, see what you can find. And thank you very much for all your time. And thank you again, Daniel, for coming on and being so helpful, dealing with the questions as well. Thank you very much, everybody. See you all soon.